to true freshman Tagovailoa to DeVonta Smith.
I don't know that anybody has contributed in more ways than DeVonta has. He exemplifies everything that any of us would want in a competitor. Constantly persevering to try to improve, try to get better, try to be productive, try to help the team.
I approach every game the same. I come out there, I'm going to give my all, and I'm going to go out there and try to execute the game plan the best way I can.
DeVonta Smith was selected 10th overall in the NFL draft, now reunited with one of his former college quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts, in Philly. And here's what he had to say about their connection already. He said, "It's great to have that connection come back. It just feels like old times, like back in college. Certainly that comfortability factor works both ways." And Dan, a lot of questions about DeVonta's size coming out of the draft, even though we feel like he's an outlier as a player and what he brings to the table anyway. But how do the Eagles implement this new offense with DeVonta and Jalen?
I would use him like the Chargers have used Keenan Allen, or I would use him the way the Saints have used Michael Thomas. Move him around, help him out, because there's things you can do for a guy who's not physically dominant to physically dominate. You can put him in a slot. Putting him in the slot, what that does is forces defenders to play a little bit off. Look at how the defender for Georgia is not going to get any kinds of hands on DeVonta. He slow plays it. He's by him about 8 or 9 yards. Never gets touched just because they brought him in the slot. Then you can motion him. Start him inside, motion him down to the bunch. Again, his superpower is the wiggly release. He sets the defender. He has to fall off because of that motion. Easy touchdown. Now, let's say you put him in the slot and they want to play press man. Well, you put him in the slot. Look at the difference between the outside corner, about 2 yards, inside corner, about 3 yards. Now DeVonta could square him up. Again, the superpower is the ability to get wiggly on the release. He can get skinny. That defensive back wants to be stabbing with the outside arm. He's using the inside arm 5 yards downfield. DeVonta has already won on this route because you moved him inside. It gave him that extra yard of separation from the defensive back. Yes. And then he dictates what that defender can do to him. That's what teams like the Chargers have done with Keenan, or again, the Saints have done with Michael Thomas. So I think it's a huge aspect of them allowing his talent to shine just by the creative things they can do before the snap, because he's so important for not only the success of this offense, but the development of Jalen Hurts.
I love the Keenan Allen comp. That didn't even occur to me until you just said it now, Dan, thinking about the way the Chargers used him, especially last season inside on bunches, because Keenan's not a big guy at all. If you ever see him in real life, I mean, he's not DeVonta skinny, but he's not imposing at the line of scrimmage. And offensive coordinators in LA have been very creative in terms of finding ways to get him open in space, get him where he is best with the ball in his hands. And you really can't do anything better with both DeVonta and Jalen than looking back to how they succeeded in college. Like, frankly, watching the Alabama offense, there's so much you can take away from that, and not just for Smith. But the way Sark recognized his ability to not only stretch the field vertically, but also horizontally is going to be so key to this Philadelphia offense. And then with Jalen, again, same thing. Go back to college. Look at the ways in which his coaches integrated both the run and pass game. Last year, it was very much on the fly. They were kind of grafting it onto the existing offense. Build that sucker from scratch. Go off of what he does best and build the offense around it.
Field?
I saw Dan trying to jump in there.
You
go ahead, Dan.
Field. You go. No. Go ahead, Field. We'll get back to you, Dan.
I saw Dan with the hand. But what I was going to say here is, I love the idea of making DeVonta Smith, I don't know about quite Keenan Allen 2.0, but at least a reasonable facsimile of him. I'm sure that's a thought that Nick Sirianni, the Eagles' new head coach, had, who was at one point the position coach for Keenan Allen for several years out in L.A. with the Chargers before moving into a quarterback's coach role. And I think that DeVonta Smith has the chance to sort of undo some wrongs for two items that he has no responsibility over. One, if the Eagles hit with DeVonta Smith all of the past blemishes with their wide receiver evaluation that you can't make it, 5 feet in Philly without hearing an Eagles fan bring up, will at least temporarily be pushed aside. The J.J. Arcega-Whitesides, last year's disappointing season from Jalen Reagor, and the list goes on and on. The second one is we spent all this time in the pre-draft process debating, maybe fruitlessly, whether a guy who's only 160, 165 pounds soaking wet can be a dominant receiver in the NFL. I'm not saying they're going to be every year 3 DeVonta Smith type receiver prospects who are built comparably and have anywhere close to his production. but it's going to open evaluators' eyes to the idea that not all diminutive wide receivers, again, relatively speaking, are bound for a path that looks more like what Tavon Austin's career was, which was when that was the naysayer version of DeVonta Smith, is that, hey, Tavon Austin, electric college player, but in the pros, more of a gadget/return man. I think DeVonta's got some pressure on him, not because of anything he's done, but because of the circumstances surrounding him.
Yeah, as Dan has pointed out, Nick Sirianni's never had a quarterback who can run like Jalen Hurts, and then you add in what DeVonta Smith can do, it could be a recipe for a lot of success. All right, the MLB All-Star Game is tonight in Colorado. All eyes, of course, will be on Shohei Ohtani. The Angels' two-way star is the starting pitcher for the American League, and he's also batting leadoff in the AL as a designated hitter. Of course, you saw him last night in the Home Run Derby. Got us thinking about some of the best two-way players in the NFL. Let's run through this list, guys. Number 5 is where we begin, and J.J. Watt is going to be a big part of this. Texans in the red zone you see here, and look at the big man with the touchdown. Dan.
That looks like me when I get into an argument with Mina, just absolutely out-muscling her for my points. J.J. Watt is such a talented guy. I know he loves Subway and back squat.
Yeah, Mina was J.J. in that scenario. How about Deion Sanders right here? Mina, Sanders can do it all.
You lose prime.
Oh, I mean, Deion Sanders, I'm surprised he's at 4, by the way, and not 1, because when you talk about 2
steps to get to that point, I've been through good seasons and bad seasons with this team, but I really feel like this year is going to be special. So, Anthony Barr, he's right. He's been through the good and the bad there. He's making a note to point out this year as a really positive one, and maybe some big things are going to happen. And some of that could have to do with the fact that there's uncertainty around Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. But Mina, with all of that, and maybe Rodgers is out of the division, are the Vikings really in that conversation of Super Bowl contenders?
No. Sorry, Anthony. I do think if Rodgers is in the division, they're the favorites to win. But I think the Vikings are a really balanced team. I think they're a team that's going to be better this season, in large part because while the offense was good and they've actually been consistently very solid since Kirk Cousins arrived, the defense took a huge nosedive last season. It was very un-Mike Zimmer-esque, and they get players back. A lot of that was because of personnel. So you have Danielle Hunter coming back from injury. Michael Pierce, incredibly underrated defensive lineman. More experience in that secondary. They, to me, are one of the units in the NFL that's most likely to improve and most likely to put them in the conversation for a wild card. But Super Bowl contenders in a conference that has the Bucs, the Rams, I just don't see it for Minnesota.
All right, so the Vikings have a Super Bowl winning offense. 1. 2, Mike Zimmer's been a part of a lot of great defenses like Mina referenced, but he knows that he can't win a Super Bowl with a style or scheme of defense that he's been great in the NFL with. The last 15 years, he's used good defensive mind as we've had. But in his words, he said he can't call defense the way he has in the past. Now, the Vikings are a defense that, one, has lived in a lot of base defense, 4 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, and 4 defensive backs, okay? They've brought a ton of pressures in the double A gaps right next to each center. They played a lot of middle field open, 2 safety, like shell coverages. And Mike Zimmer has said, we can't do that anymore. So the fascinating thing is, how does one of the best defensive minds in football, and honestly, he's got a ton of pressure to fix this. He's there as a defensive-minded head coach. How does he reinvent a good defense? Is it taking one of those linebackers off the field and putting a nickel back on the field? Did they draft a guy like Kaz Surratt out of North Carolina to play that fringe defensive back linebacker? Are they going to play with 5 DBs? That is one of the more fascinating stories in the NFL to me is this. Mike Zimmer has to win, and his defense has to be the reason they win. This is Super Bowl caliber offense. Kirk Cousins has proven he's plenty good enough. Christian Darrisaw is going to be very good. They got a great run game, 2 elite receivers. Is the defense going to be good enough to make sure that this is a Super Bowl contending roster? Because if it's not, Mike Zimmer will be out of a job.
Okay, Field, we're going to you in 1 second, but Mina, I got to give you a chance here. Go fast. What you wanted to say?
No. I'll be really quick because I think Dan made some excellent points about Zimmer and whose defenses have constantly evolved over the years. He brought that double A gap blitz to the NFL. It was copied. They move off of it.
Yep.
I think he's keenly aware of what they have to do, particularly in that secondary with sub packages. My question, I think Field would have a great answer for this, is do they have the personnel to do it? Because I mentioned Danielle Hunter and Michael Pierce, but when you look in that secondary, it's a lot of young players, not a lot of stars.
Field.
Yeah.
All All right, so yeah, I'll turn to that defensive personnel then, Mina, and I'll just note that, by the way, I actually sort of think the defense for this team sets the floor and the offense sets the ceiling. Like, they can only achieve greatness if Kirk Cousins does what he hasn't previously done, which is in the highest leverage moments carry that team to victory, specifically end of season and playoff games. But defensively,
Sure.
I think there are sort of three ways they get back to their Zimmer ways. One, the reshaped secondary is better because Mike Zimmer can turn veterans who are aging into really good players once again. He did it with Terrence Newman for years. That's just one of many examples.
Good point.
Two, the beefed up interior defensive line with, as Mina mentioned, Michael Pierce and also Sheldon Richardson makes them a far more formidable run defense. And then three, they had a couple of players, one being Anthony Barr himself, who I thought last year did not play up to his own standards.
Okay.
And if he gets back to the level that he was at, which is why the Vikings reinvested in him for 5 years and major money just a couple of free agencies ago, this defense turns back the clock and looks like the 2018, 2017 version that I think is good enough, if Aaron Rodgers is not there, to make them the clear favorites in the division.
It's really interesting. Dan Orlovsky said that this Vikings offense and that guy right there, Kirk Cousins, is a Super Bowl caliber offense and quarterback. We got so much more coming your way on NFL Live with Angels two-way star Shohei Ohtani set to be the starting pitcher and leadoff hitter in tonight's MLB All-Star Game. We show you some of the top NFL two-way players and the NFL celebration king himself, Chad Johnson, joining the show. We chat with Ocho Cinco and we take a look at some of his all-time celebrations and others in the NFL.